Hi everyone, welcome to the 7th week. For this week we're going to be reading Chapter 7. You have a quiz on Chapter 7, 10 questions, and you have a discussion board. Let's review some of the requirements. For the discussion board, make sure to have an in-text citation and a reference in APA formatted to support your work. Make sure it's posted by Thursday at 11:55 p.m. and that you have 2 peer responses. Your peer responses can be to any of the questions I post or to any questions from your peers or any responses to your peers. That'll be fine as well. For this week, you're going to be looking at trade policies for developing nations, the characteristics of those trade policies, and stabilization of primary products. When we look at advanced nations, you'll notice that they have high levels of GDP per capita, longer life expectancy, higher levels of adult literacy, but then developing nations are going to struggle. They're going to have lower levels of GDP per capita, shorter life expectancies, and lower levels of adult literacy. You'll notice a large gap between those 3 characteristics, and that'll be the big difference between those 2 types of economies. Some characteristics of a developing nation: highly dependent on advanced nations. Import-oriented growth. So they focus on importing to stimulate growth in the economy. Exports are mainly advanced. Primary products: agriculture, raw materials. Manufactured goods are very simple, so it's very hard to trade those. And trade among developing nations, very minor, because there's really not a lot of the higher income level that they can afford from other goods or services. Now, developing nations, when they move into exports of manufactured products, there's going to be an investment of human capital in technology. It's going to lead to a lot of liberalization of trade barriers and policies. Poor nations really need to take advantage of this, and they need to take advantage because of the increased barriers to imports from developing nations. They have a lot of structural issues. So how can they take advantage of these challenges? And that's what we're going to be facing, and that you're going to be seeing in this chapter. Now, for this quiz this week, let's go over some possible explanations that you could have, or some possible questions. You have an hour to complete 10 questions. Now, certain things that you're going to be looking at this week: import substitution policies. The focus of import substitution policies and why they occur. Export-led growth. What does that lead to? When you look at the International Tin Agreement, it's a utilization of way of stabilizing prices, but what device is used? What is the primary goal of an international commodity agreement? You want to look at different methods that are used by the international commodity agreements to stabilize commodity prices. Different types of things that they've looked at. Which nation accounts for the largest amount of OPEC reserves and production? What reduces the likelihood of a cartel being successful? Why is it difficult for a producer to maintain a cartel? Why is it difficult? And think about this, always with cartels, there's always an ability or a willingness to cheat. What is it when cartels establish its profit maximizing price? What does that mean? Looking at terms of trade of developing countries and what might deteriorate terms of trade. Now, trade strategy is developed countries use to replace commodity exports with exports such as processed primary products, semi-manufacturers, and manufacturers. What is the replication or the replacing of those? Which trade strategy have developing countries used to restrict imports of manufactured goods? To help a developing nation strengthen their international competitiveness, many industrial nations have granted non-reciprocal tariff reductions to developing nations. Under what policy? Next question is looking at developing nations and international commodity agreements. Next question is looking at what are international commodity agreements. Next question is looking at to differentiate between developed countries from developing countries. Next question is looking at industrialized policies used by developing countries place emphasis on comparative advantage as a guide to resource allocation. What industrialized policy? And the last question is looking at to be considered a good candidate for an export cartel, a commodity should be what? So those are some of the questions that you could possibly get. There's a random amount of questions that each person can get, so that's why you have more questions this week. If you have any questions, let me know, but really focus on the application of the terms. That's the key component. When you can focus on the application of the terms, it can help you do well. And if you have any questions, let me know. But I look forward to your effort.